Israel's the one that wants to go. He said the only one that wants to keep going is Hamas. Actually, Israel is the one, and you should let him go and let him finish the job. He doesn't want to do it. He's become like a Palestinian, but they don't like him because he's a very bad Palestinian. He's a weak one.
Finish the job. There is a word for what that job produces: collateral. Collateral damage, collateral casualties. The word sits in briefings and press releases and parliamentary statements. It does a specific job. It takes human death and folds it under an acceptable category. This was beside the point. This was, regrettably, adjacent to the point. But the person who died does not experience it that way. Their child does not experience it that way. And when the reaction comes, and it always comes, the people who use that word are the first to ask, why do they hate us? Where does this come from? How could anybody do this? This video is about that question, about why the people asking it already know the answer and have chosen not to name it. First, I'll look at the arithmetic of collateral damage. So let us begin with the numbers, not because numbers are the point, but because the numbers tell you something about the scale of what the language is being asked to contain. These figures relate to one place, Gaza, a territory of 365 square kilometres on the eastern Mediterranean coast, home to approximately 2.3 million people, one of the most densely populated places on earth, and the conflict began on the 7th of October 2023. It is, as of the date of this script, still ongoing. There is no end date. There is no agreed pathway to reconstruction. There is no named future. So the first figure is 112,000, and what it means in Gaza, midpoint estimate of violent deaths by the 6th of October 2025, the Max Planck Institute for Democratic Research calculated the official health ministry figures undercounted by 35 to 41% due to their bodies under the rubble. The range between 99,997 to 125,915. The next figure, 27% children and 24% women. And what it means in Gaza, the demographic breakdown of those killed: 27% were children under 15, 24% were women. Well over half fit no statistical profile of armed combatants. The next figure, life expectancy, 46 for women and 36 for men. And what it means, projected 2024 life expectancy in Gaza, pre-war figures were 77 for women and 74 for men. The conflict produced life expectancy losses of 34.4 years in 2023 and 36.4 years in 2024 compared to the no conflict scenario. And the next figure, 125,000 tons. What it means in Gaza, the explosives dropped on Gaza by mid-2025, more than 4 times the combined tonnage dropped on Dresden, Hamburg and London in World War II, which was 27,448 metric tons, equivalent to the explosive power of more than 8 Hiroshima atomic bombs. And the next figure, 81% of structures and 92% of housing. And what it means in Gaza, by March 2026, 81% of all structures in Gaza have been destroyed or damaged. 92% of housing stock damaged or destroyed. 41 to 47 million tons of debris to be cleared before reconstruction can begin. And the next figure, 1,800 plus. And what it means in Gaza, those are the healthcare workers killed or detained by March 2026. An average of 2 to 3 healthcare workers killed every day since October 2023. UN experts have described the systematic targeting of the health system as medicide. And the next figure, 53 to 80 billion dollars. And what it means in Gaza, the World Bank, UN, and the EU Joint Assessment, February 2025, calculate $53.2 billion for a 10-year reconstruction. By March 2026, the total needs estimated at 40 to 80 billion. Gaza's GDP contracted 83% in the first 15 months. And the next figure, 658,000. And what it means in Gaza, school-aged children in Gaza who have had no access to education for 3 consecutive school years. These numbers represent one conflict zone. The same accounting, different figures, same structure, but also applies to Yemen, where a decade of airstrikes and blockades have produced one of the worst humanitarian crises in recorded history. Or to Iraq, were estimates of the civilian deaths from the 2003 invasion and its aftermath ranging to the hundreds of thousands, to Afghanistan, to Syria. The language is consistent across all of them. Collateral, regrettable, unintended. The operational objective was achieved. But now for the specific: one family, one name in the same conflict in Gaza since October 2023, the Al-Najjar family. The United Nations Office of the High Commission for Human Rights verified the killing of 138 members of the Al-Najjar family in 18 separate incidents across multiple locations in Gaza, amongst them 35 women and 62 children. The Al-Astar family, 94 members killed in 8 incidents, 33 women and 45 children. These are not statistics, they are families. They had names, they had homes, and now case files in a UN verification database, which is the closest thing to a memorial they will receive in Western press. On the 23rd of May 2025, an airstrike hit the home of Dr. Alaa al-Najjar, a paediatrician at Nasser Hospital. It killed 9 of her 10 children. The children were aged between 7 months to 12 years. It also killed her husband, Dr. Hamdi al-Najjar. The incident was verified by the BBC and The Guardian through hospital records and on-the-ground reporting. Dr. Alaa and her only surviving son, 11-year-old Adam, were evacuated to Italy for medical treatment in June 2025. She is a doctor. She cannot be easily replaced. Her husband was a doctor. He cannot be replaced at all. 9 of her children are all dead. By October 2024, the UN estimated that 900 entire families had been completely removed from civil registry. Every member gone. Set aside the military briefings. Ask a simpler question. What is it like to live there? So in terms of shelter, the reality as of 2025, 78% of all structures in Gaza destroyed or damaged. Over 192,000 buildings, the majority of the population displaced multiple times, many sleeping in the open. And for the hospitals, 18 of the 36 hospitals operational as of August 2025. 94% of all hospitals and clinics damaged or destroyed. 2,000 hospital beds remain for over 2 million people. Of the doctors, over 1,800 healthcare workers killed or detained by March 2026, including the last remaining orthopedic surgeon in northern Gaza, killed in December 2024. A doctor is not a replaceable unit. 20 years of training, institutional knowledge, patient relationships built over a career, gone. In March 2025, UN and BBC investigations confirmed 15 Palestinian medics and rescue workers were killed one by one near Rafah. A Duke University study estimated 29,000 to 46,000 injuries requiring complex reconstructive surgery, a backlog estimated to take a decade to clear if capacity were restored today. And for water infrastructure systematically destroyed, waste collection and medical waste treatment destroyed, clean water access eliminated for large areas of the population. For food, or what food actually gets through, World Food Programme food parcels contain rice, lentils, beans, chickpea paste, tomato paste, fortified sunflower oil. More than a third of the population were not eating for days at a time. Meat, eggs, vegetables and fresh fruit were consumed very rarely. One mother told the WFP she warned her children not to eat their rations immediately. She could not trust there would be enough food for the next day. Food costs over 1,000% above pre-war prices. Families reported rationing a single meal over multiple days. And in terms of medicine, 320 essential medicines have reached zero stock. And that's from the Gaza Ministry of Health from December 2025. Restricted items documented by physicians or human rights include anesthesia, strong painkillers, insulin, scalpels, surgical tools, tourniquets, gauze, dialysis supplies, chest tubes, oxygen cylinders. Médecins Sans Frontières reported surgeries performed without anesthesia, amputations without pain relief, a 7-year-old child screaming for anesthesia that was not available, for people with chronic conditions, hypertension, diabetes, heart disease. The absence of medication leads to preventable complications and preventable death. These are the country's silent dead. Nobody films them. Many of them are not recorded. And next, education. The reality in Gaza as of 2025. Third consecutive school year with no school for 658,000 children, an entire generation. No classroom, no future being built. And next, the duration. This has been the condition of life in Gaza since October 2023. Over 18 months at the time of writing, with no visible end, no pathway to reconstruction, and with no future that can be named. Now hold all of that in your head at once, not the figures, the reality. You are living in rubble. Your hospital has been bombed. The doctor who knew your medical history, who had been trained for 20 years, who had delivered children and repaired bodies and kept people alive, is dead. There is no replacement for that person. You cannot go online and order another specialist. You cannot rebuild that knowledge overnight. It's gone. You cannot reliably get clean water. You cannot reliably get food. If you get sick, and with those conditions, you will get sick, the hospital that remains is overwhelmed, understaffed, and running out on almost everything. Your child has not been to school in 3 years, not because of a pandemic, not because of poverty, because the schools were bombed, and the bombs keep coming, and nobody is talking about when this ends. This is not a conflict, it is the destruction of a society, and it's been going on long enough that children need to be born into it and have known nothing else. Next, I'm going to talk about the sky that never stops. There are many, but an additional dimension to life in Gaza that the numbers do not capture: the sound. Palestinian writer Shahid Shafi described in 2024, always there is buzzing. Since October 2023, she wrote, the constant overhead presence of drones has become so intense as to cause headaches, irritability and insomnia, and can literally drive one mad. These are not military aircraft you can hear and respond to. They are small, quiet, constant, commercial quadcopter drones, DJI models, the same technology used for wedding photography and aerial surveying, retrofitted with explosives or cameras or both. Al Jazeera's Sonard investigation in May 2025 documented the Israeli military's systematic use of commercial DJI drones modified for surveillance and bombing. In November 2024, NPR collected multiple eyewitness accounts of small, gun-carrying drones shooting and killing civilians in the streets of Gaza. Euromed, Human Rights Monitor documented a repeated pattern: quadcopters hovering outside windows at night, entering shelters, filming sleeping families, then broadcasting specific sounds designed to force a response: dogs savaging children, screaming women, ambulance sirens, before shooting anyone who came to a window or left their tent to investigate. One resident told Euromed Monitor, these drones have conditioned us not to respond to cries for help because we simply cannot tell if it's a real emergency or a trap designed to lure us into being shot. Every day, every night, the buzzing is there, and every person living under it wakes up not knowing whether today is the day they or somebody they love becomes another unrecorded death. Not in the official count, not in the headline, just gone. So how long has this been going on? Since the 7th of October 2023. As of the date of this script, over 18 months. And when does it end? Nobody has given a credible answer to that question. How does it end? With what conditions? And with what future for the 2.3 million people who survive it? With what reconstruction? With what accountability? These questions are not being asked on the mainstream platforms. They're not in the briefing notes of the politicians who talk about finishing the job. They are the questions that require us to acknowledge that these are people with a future, or that we have decided they are not. Next on.
Yeah, Gaza, they pulled out of Gaza. They pulled out in terms of negotiating. It was too bad. Hamas didn't really want to make a deal. I think they want to die, and it's very, very bad. And it got to be to a point where you're going to have to finish the job.
Talk about finishing the job. And then there are the voices. Not only the religious voices, politicians, commentators, former officials, think tank contributors, newspaper columnists, people appearing on mainstream platforms, the BBC, Sky News, Channel 4, American cable news, with cups of water and good lighting and full protection of respectability, defending it without apparent shame, in the full possession of the information available to anybody with an internet connection, the UN reports, the WHO data, the satellite images, the family names in the OHCHR database, and finding the language to explain why it is necessary, why it must continue, why in fact the problem has not gone far enough. Finish the job. And that is not an anonymous phrase. It has named authors speaking on the record on camera. So who? Donald Trump, the US president. What he said? Let them finish the job in the Gaza debate, June 2024. Quote, sending Israel everything it needs to finish the job, March 2025, after the hostage warning to Hamas. Warned in September 2025 that if Hamas rejected his peace plan, he would back Israel to, quotes, finish the job independently. And next, Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, what he said? We will finish the job in Rafah, said in March 2024, despite international pressure. At the UN General Assembly in September 2025, repeatedly vowed Israel, quotes, must finish the job. After ceasefire violations in November 2025, threatened to, quote, finish the job if foreign troops did not disarm Hamas. And next, Nikki Haley, former US ambassador to the UN, when visiting an Israeli Defense Forces post in May 2024, wrote, quotes, finish them on Israeli artillery shells intended for Gaza, has consistently argued, quotes, Israel must finish the job in Gaza and that a ceasefire would be, quotes, defeat. Next, Ron DeSantis, Florida governor, and what he said, Republican primary debates late 2023 and early 2024 told Netanyahu to, quote, finish the job once and for all with these butchers, end quote. Next, Keir Starmer, UK Prime Minister, on the 11th of October 2023, asked on LBC Radio by presenter Nick Ferrari, a siege is appropriate? Cutting off power? Cutting off water? Starmer responded, I think that Israel does have that right. He later claimed he was answering a different question. The Labour Muslim Network described his comments as endorsement of, quotes, the collective punishment of 2.2 million people. Multiple Labour councillors resigned. The UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territory described the statement as support for, quotes, the commission of a war crime. Starmer clarified 9 days later after the political cost became unsustainable. These are not fringe commentators. They are the most powerful political figures in the Western world, saying these words on record with full knowledge of the condition described in this act. And separately, in May 2025, Pastor John Haig, founder of Christians United for Israel, 11 million members, the largest Zionist organisation in the world, told a Jerusalem summit, quote, the free world will end Iran nuclear ambitions with a bang. The same man who called for a preemptive military strike on Iran at the CUFI Washington summit in 2007. 18 years later, same message, same platform, still unchallenged. Let us be precise about what that phrase means in context. Not in a neutral military expression, it has history. The idea that a civilian population can be subjected to conditions of systematic destruction until either a political or military objective is achieved. That job is not finished until those people are either gone, subdued, or broken, is not a new idea. It's one of the oldest ideas in the history of organised violence against civilian populations. And it is an idea that the post-war international order, the Geneva Conventions, the founding of the United Nations, the Nuremberg Principles were all specifically designed to make unsayable. Those institutions exist because the people who built them had watched what happened when the idea was treated as acceptable, when the language of completion, of necessity, finishing what was started, was applied to civilian populations. They built the architecture of international law specifically to ensure that the idea would never be spoken again without consequence. And now it is being spoken on mainstream platforms, in parliaments, on panels, without consequence, without challenge, without the presenter leaning forward and saying, do you understand what you just said? Do you understand what that phrase means? Do you understand the direction this language points? That is failure, not just of the people saying it, of the people not stopping them. There is a lesson of history that is not abstract, it is specific. It was learned at enormous cost. It produced binding international law. It produced institutions that have now been running for 80 years. And the lesson is this: There is no version of finish the job applied to civilian population that history has ever judged to be on the right side. Not one. The people saying it in 2025 and 2026 know this, or they should. And the people interviewing them, the people sitting beside them on the panel, the people in the audience nodding, they should be asking it loudly, on record, every single time. The absence of that challenge is not neutrality, it's permission. The question this video is asking is not what is justified. That is a legal question for international courts, and some of them are answering it. The question is, what does it say about us that we can watch this, know this, and find the language to defend it? And what does it produce in the people who have to live it? Next, I'm going to talk about the reaction they cannot understand. There is a pattern in how Western governments respond to attacks on Western targets. The attack happens, the statement follows within hours: shock, horror, condemnation, an attack on our values, an attack on our way of life. We will not be intimidated. And then the question, which is always asked as if it has no answer: why do they hate us? This question is not asked in ignorance, it is asked in performance, because the people asking it have spent years funding, arming and providing political cover for the conditions that produce the answer. The connection between the destruction of civilian life and the radicalization of survivors and witnesses is not a theory. It is one of the most consistently documented findings in conflict research, and it is really not complicated. The Rand Corporation has published on it. The British government's own Prevent strategy is premised on it. The idea that conditions of grievance, humiliation and perceived injustice drive recruitment towards violent extremism. But that logic is applied in one direction, consistently. When the grievance is about Western policy in Muslim majority countries, the logic is suspended. The connection is just not made. So in summary, the same governments whose Prevent programs are built on the documented link between grievance and radicalization consistently refuse to apply that link to their own foreign policy. The logic that explains domestic radicalization is not permitted to explain international radicalization. The cause and effect are treated as unrelated. The shock is performed. The connection is known. It is simply not named. Nobody wants to be collateral damage. Nobody's child is less dead because the bomb was manufactured in a democracy. Nobody experiences the destruction of their hospital as a proportionate military response. Next, I want to talk about done in the name of Christ. Now the question the commentary does not ask. The military operations this video has described are not happening in a political vacuum. They are happening with the active support, encouragement and lobbying of specific religious and political infrastructure in the United States and the United Kingdom. That infrastructure calls itself Christian. It is worth examining what that actually teaches. Christians for Israel, CUFI, is the largest Zionist organization in the United States. Not the largest Jewish Zionist organization, the largest Zionist organization, full stop. Over 11 million members. By comparison, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, has 5 million. CUFI was founded by televangelist John Haig at its second annual Washington Summit on the 17th of July 2007. Haig told delegates it's time for our country to consider a military preemptive strike against Iran if they will not yield to democracy. He framed this as a prophetic mandate, arguing that a nuclear-armed Iran would trigger the war of Gog and Magog described in the book of Ezekiel. At the same summit, Haig led over 4,000 CUFI delegates to Capitol Hill to lobby members of Congress directly, with the explicit message that the US must keep all options on the table, including preemptive military strikes on Iran. His framing at that summit included a direct historical comparison. Quotes, "It is 1938 all over again. Iran is Germany. Ahmadinejad is Hitler." Waiting for diplomacy in Hague framework was equivalent to the appeasement of Nazi Germany. The PBS program Bill Moy's Journal aired a full segment of this in October 2007. The quote is on record. In May 2005, at a Jerusalem summit, Haig told delegates, "The free world will end Iran nuclear ambitions with a bang." 18 years later, same man, same message. The CUFI UK homepage, March 2026, carries the headline, The Iranian regime is evil. That is not a news report. That is a theological and political position statement on the homepage of an organisation with 120,000 UK followers. The theology has not changed. The access to power has expanded. What the CUFI teaches: support for Western military action against Iran is a biblical obligation. Opposition to such action is, in their framing, ultimately evil. What has CUFI done? Lobby Congress for military action on Iran, claimed central role in ending US funding for UNRWA, which is the main UN relief agency for Palestinian refugees. The CUFI teaches the conflict in the Middle East is unsolvable by human means. It is a spiritual war. Palestinians are proxies for Satan. What CUFI has done? CUFI's National Prayer Director stated publicly, Satan is always fighting God's word, and then goes on to say, that is the reason for all the trouble in the Middle East. Next, what CUFI teaches: moving the US Embassy to Jerusalem was a prophetic act, part of the sequence leading to the second coming of Christ. What CUFI has done? Hague gave the benediction at the US Embassy opening in Jerusalem in 2018. CUFI claimed credit for influencing that decision. Next, what CUFI teaches: war with Iran is not just acceptable, it is necessary for the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Haig's 2006 book, Jerusalem Countdown, described Iran as a catalyst for the prophesied Gog-Magog war. What CUFI has done? CUFI UK operates in Britain with 120,000 plus social media followers. Website currently carries the headline, Iranian regime is evil. Let us be precise about what this is and what it is not. This is not Christianity. The Sermon on the Mount does not contain a passage about preemptive military strikes. The Gospels do not include a theology of conquest. The Jesus of the New Testament was killed by an occupying military power, not celebrated by one. What CUFI teaches is a specific political theology, Christian Zionism, built on a reading of the book of Revelation and the book of Ezekiel that treats the modern state of one country as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, and the military destruction of the country's neighbours as a prerequisite for the second coming of Christ. There is a name for a theological framework that endorses mass violence against the civilian population and frames opposition to that violence as evil. It is not a name Western governments are willing to use when the theology is Christian rather than Islamic. Next, I'll talk briefly about the theology of collateral damage. CUFI's own National Prayer Director has stated that the deaths of Palestinian civilians are a manifestation of Satan's war against God's people. In this framework, the collateral damage is not unfortunate. It is the theological necessity. 138 members of the al-Najjar family are not the victims of a military operation. They are casualties of a divine plan. This is not a fringe view. It is the published position of the largest Zionist organisation in the world with 11 million members, direct access to Congress, and a UK operation with 120,000 followers. Next, I'll talk about the standards we do not apply. The UK government has a formal definition of extremism. It has a list of prescribed organisations. It has a prevent programme. It has a government counter-extremism strategy. These tools are applied with a consistency that is worth examining. What has happened to Muslim organisations? Hizb ut-Tahrir was prescribed as a terrorist organisation on the 19th of January 2024 under the Terrorism Act 2000. Criminal offences now include membership, inviting support, arranging meetings, displaying symbols, and online expressions of support. Maximum sentence, 14 years imprisonment. The Home Office cited HT articles praising the 7th of October 2023 Hamas attacks and calling for further violence. What happened to equivalent organisations? Christians United for Israel UK, whose founder called for preemptive military strikes on Iran in 2007 and again in 2025, whose theology frames Palestinian civilian deaths as satanic opposition to divine will and operates with over 120,000 UK followers, and its own active YouTube channel has not been reviewed under any counter-extremism framework. And next, the Muslim Association of Britain, named by Community Secretary Michael Gove as potentially extremist under the new definition, threatening to bar them from access to government ministers, civil servants and public funding. What happened to equivalent Christian organisations? The CUFI UK, whose theology frames Palestinian civilian deaths as spiritually necessary and opposition to military violence as satanic has not been named under any extremist definition. And next, Palestinian Action prescribed as a terrorist organisation in July 2025 for direct action against arms manufacturers, property damage, no deaths. But what has happened to equivalent Christian organisations? Organisations that have lobbied and celebrated the bombing of civilian infrastructure, killing tens of thousands, have not been prescribed, reviewed or named under any counter-extremism framework. What happens to Muslim organisations? Cage, MEND, the Islamic Human Rights Commission, mainstream Muslim advocacy organisations repeatedly named, scrutinised and threatened with extremist classification for holding political views. What has happened to equivalent Christian organisations? The institutional apparatus of Christian Zionism in the West, which endorses, celebrates and lobbies for military operations that have killed over 100,000 people, is not subject to equivalent scrutiny. The Humanist UK observed in September 2025 Christian nationalism and Islamist extremism mirror one another. Each defines itself against the other, constructing an enemy image that fuels its sense of purpose. The difference is not in structure of the ideology. The difference is in which one is treated as a national security emergency and which one is invited to give the benediction at embassy openings. This is not about whether any of these organisations should be proscribed. That is the legal question. This is about the consistency of the standard. Either ideologies that endorse and lobby for mass civilian casualties are a concern, or are they not? At the moment, the answer depends on entirely which religion is doing the endorsing. Okay, next I want to talk about humanity beyond the soundbite. There is a question that the comfortable never ask. Not was this military justified, not was the response proportionate, not what were the strategic objectives. The question is, what would I want? If it were my city, my hospital, my school, my family, if I had watched my neighbourhood reduced to rubble from the air by weapons paid for by governments that call themselves democracies, if I had waited at a checkpoint for food that was being withheld, if I had buried my children, what would I want? Nobody in that situation is a statistic. Nobody is collateral. Nobody dies as part of a military objective. They die as themselves. They die with names. They die having wanted the same things every human wants: safety, continuity, the ability to see tomorrow. As of September 2025, 2,596 children in Gaza had lost both parents. A further 53,724 had lost one parent. The UN RWA Commissioner General told the League of Arab States in 2025 a man-made famine is confirmed in Gaza. This is the direct and predictable result of a siege. The third consecutive school year has begun with 658,000 children in Gaza having no school to attend. These are not the arguments. They are the facts. They belong in the same conversation as the strategic briefings and the political statements and the theological justifications. They are part of the conversation that is consistently left out. The things being done in Gaza, in Iran, in Yemen, and the things being done in Iraq and Afghanistan are being done in our names, with our government support, with our tax revenues, with our weapons. And they're being done in part with the active encouragement of a religious and political infrastructure that has been allowed to operate under the label of Christianity, without Christianity asking loudly enough, not in our name either. So in closing, how did we get here? This is not a rhetorical question. It is a traceable question. It required decades of language being slowly adjusted, of civilian deaths becoming collateral damage, of bombing a hospital becoming targeting a site for military purpose, of children dying in rubble becoming the operational context. Each step a little further from human reality, each step requiring a little less of us. And now we are here, where people sit on television panels and defend, without apparent shame, the continuation of conditions that the United Nations describes as man-made famine, where a doctor with 20 years of experience who cannot be replaced, whose knowledge and skill and irreplaceable human presence is simply gone, is filed under operational cost. Where is the shame? Shame is a moral instrument. It is the signal that tells us we have crossed a line. When it is absent, when people can look directly at what is being described and find words to explain why it must continue, something has been lost that is very hard to recover. The religious voices in this conversation often have the least to say about the humanity of the people being killed. That is worth sitting with. The organisations described in Act 3 of this video are Christian organisations. They use the language of faith, of covenant, of divine mandate, and yet the quality most associated with Christian tradition, compassion, the ability to love your neighbour, recognition that every human carries inherent dignity, is precisely absent from their public statements about what is happening to civilians in Gaza and Iran. The same is true, to be fair, of religious voices on all sides of these conflicts who have found theological justification for the killing of civilians. Theology has a remarkable capacity to provide reasons for whatever its holders have already decided to do. But if you're going to invoke Christianity as the basis for your political program, if you are going to stand in front of a congregation and speak of divine mandate and prophetic fulfillment, then you are also responsible for explaining what Christianity says about a child who has not been to school in 3 years because every school was bombed, about a family with 138 people lost, about a doctor who cannot be replaced. The Gospels have a lot to say about that child. Very little of it sounds like, finish the job. There is one more thread that runs through all of this. It is not only about what is happening in Gaza or Iran. It is about what is being permitted to happen in our own political culture, about what language is now acceptable, about who is being targeted. Donald Trump, at the United Nations General Assembly on the 24th of September 2025, looked at the assembled representatives of the world and said of London, now they want to go to Sharia law. He was talking about Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, a British-born man of Pakistani heritage, a practicing Muslim, a politician who has been elected 3 times by Londoners of every background. There is no proposal for Sharia law in London. There never has been. There is no policy document. There is no legislation, no record. The claim is not debatable. It is simply false. Trump does not know Sadiq Khan. He has never met him, knows nothing about him beyond the fact he is Muslim in a position of prominence. And that, it appears, is sufficient. The accusation is the agenda. Trump called Khan horrible, vicious, disgusting. He previously called him a stone-cold loser and a very dumb man. Khan said Trump, quote, singled him out for no other reason than his faith. That is the correct reading. Trump is not conducting a policy disagreement with Khan. He does not engage with Khan's policies. He engages with Sadiq Khan's identity. This is not casual racism. It is something more deliberate than that. It is the start of a pattern. And the lesson of history is that the pattern is not accidental and the outcome is not unpredictable. You identify a group, you attach false characteristics to them, you find a prominent member and make him the symbol of the threat. You repeat it. You give it the platform of the most powerful office on earth and you watch what it produces. History has a word for this. It has examples. They do not end well. And the people who set the process in motion always claim afterwards that they did not know where it was going. This video talked about Christian nationalism, but the deeper truth is this. Most of the people in that movement are not strategists. They are lost. They have been fed versions of events about civilizational conflict, about divine mandate, about existential threat that is built substantially on misinformation, and they believe it, not cynically, genuinely. Trump is the most visible embodiment of this. He is not the architect of the ideology. He barely understands it. He openly states obvious falsehoods about London, about Sadiq Khan, about what is happening in Gaza, about the nature of the enemy he claims to be fighting. When he makes these claims, he is not performing for effect. He appears to actually believe what he is being told. He is, in this sense, a useful fool, the most dangerous kind, because the impact is enormous and the accountability is zero. The people who have shaped his worldview know exactly what they're doing. The people who have fed him the framing, the theology, the civilizational narrative, the CUFI, the Christian nationalist infrastructure, the think tanks and the media apparatus, they are not lost. They are navigating towards a specific destination. Trump is the vehicle, and the vehicle does not need to understand the route. So are we lost? Not irreversibly, but the path back requires something specific. It requires people, individually and collectively, to refuse the language, to call collateral damage what it is, to look at the living conditions described in this video and say, no, not in my name, not with my silence, not with my vote, not with my tax, not with my theology. It requires the religious voices who have the most to say about human dignity to actually say it loudly about these people now. It requires commentators who have found the language to defend this to be asked on camera, on record, to describe in plain terms what they are defending. Not the strategic objective, the condition. The child without a school, the hospital without doctors, the family without water, the city without a future. Humanity is not lost, but it has to be chosen actively against the language that makes the choice seem unnecessary. Nobody consents to being collateral damage. It is time we stop using a word that pretends that they do. If this video made you think, please like and subscribe, share it. The conversations that need to happen are not happening in the mainstream. Help them happen here. And thank you.